and start work his way across. Sure. Hi, I'm Shem. I work with interface engineering. I'm a mechanical engineer and also an energy analyst. I've worked on multiple LEED projects through the 8 years that I've been in the industry, and I've also actually just started one Green Globes project. I'm accredited LEED professional and Green Globes professional, and I split my time between doing LEED certification, sustainability, as well as mechanical engineering.
I'm Jessica Gracie Griffin, and I am the LEED manager as well as a member of the Sustainability Resources Group at Sarah Architects. And it's similar, actually, Shem, to what you're saying in terms of how you split your time between, I work on certifications for a portion of time, and then I'm part of our internal group that helps improve sustainability and performance to all of our projects within the office. And my background is in mechanical engineering, but also in architecture. And at Sarah these days, we've been doing many certifications. We've touched many different certification systems, with the exception of Green Globes. I would say about 70 to 80% of our larger projects right now are going through certification. And if we looked at all the projects as a whole, probably about half of them are being certified, if I think about the last 5 years.
Hi, I'm Richard Manning. I'm a principal with Green Building Services. We're a sustainability consulting firm, and so we do help a lot of customers with a lot of architecture firms, a lot of owners who are seeking LEED certification or other certifications for their buildings. And we do energy modeling in-house and building commissioning in-house, and basically work with clients to help them improve building performance. Although we don't design buildings, we work with designers to help them make their buildings perform better. I've been with Green Building Services since 2000. We're 500 to 1. We've got 500 LEED buildings and 1 Green Globe so far. So, but Green Globes is growing. I think we're going to get our second one here pretty soon. We've kind of recently become more sort of rating system agnostic. As the market changes, we're looking at different rating systems. We want to see buildings improve and people making environmental choices and looking at triple bottom line and making choices. And it's not our place to tell them how they should do that. We're just sort of like, let's look at building performance, let's look at energy performance, and let's look at improving the spaces that people have to live in and work in, and try and improve the environmental performance of buildings. So we've taken a much more open approach. It used to be that nobody asked for anything else except for LEED, but we're seeing now that there's more openness in the marketplace. People are looking at the ASHRAE 189.1, which is the ASHRAE standard for high performance buildings, the International Green Construction Code, Cal Green, which is basically LEED. There's a lot of different things out there that's leading building performance.
Okay, I'm Tom White. I currently work as the Chief Engineer at the Green Building Initiative. We're the Green Globes guys, headquartered here in Portland. And my background kind of lines itself with Richard. I formerly worked at GLUMEC from 2004 to 2010. Actually, I have to take that back. It's 2008, 4 years. But I've worked on about 30 different LEED projects, and now aligned with Green Globes projects. Spent a little more than a year as a technical director at Green Building Services, working on commissioning and energy analyst projects. So my background is a mechanical engineer. I've been in the business more than 30 years, and I've seen a lot of changes, and a lot of progression, a lot of evolution. And hopefully tonight to be able to answer your questions about Green Globes. And I'd have to second what Richard said. The emphasis here is in which is a better car. You can drive any car you want to get from A to B, but we're really trying to focus, I think, the whole industry on what is sustainable, what makes enduring sustainable buildings. And I think we're probably all in the same game. Thank you.
Thank you. So that gets rid of like half the questions I was going to ask.
There's more to say
No
about that.
boxing.
We're all long-winded.
First, I want to lay out the rules for this discussion. There are no fans allowed under any of your chairs. So if you have any fans allowed, you have to leave, and you're not allowed to come back for an hour and a half. For those of you who have watched debates in Florida, you'll understand why that's not allowed and very controversial. Anyway,
We don't have any fans.
but first, I think we'll start with, this was a question that was gathered from emails, I believe. Generally, what are the advantages and disadvantages of green globes or LEED projects as they relate to small business owners with limited budgets? I think we'll start with Tom.
I get the easiest question first, right? Okay. I think that you'll find, and you guys have all probably experienced this, cost is always a dominant factor in decision making. And the overheads for building a sustainable project, you're going to spread those one way or another. And I'm not sure that the cost to imbue your materials, your energy, your water systems are any more expensive in LEED than they are with green globes. You still have to make the investment. And I think smaller projects, building owners that are their cash is pretty tight. They're tight-fisted. They're going to hesitate. But there are other questions on the list here, and I won't spill into it. I'll just say this. I think the standards and the standard practices have come a long way in the last 10, 15 years, and we're seeing, regardless of the type of project, how big or how small, owners and investors are looking for green solutions across the board.
Richard, did you
Yeah,
have
well,
anything?
I would just say that, you know, it's kind of a question of values when it comes to small buildings, and although Green Globes doesn't require energy modeling and commissioning, and LEED requires energy modeling and commissioning, there's a value to both of those processes, even for smaller buildings, and especially commissioning of smaller buildings, to make sure that the owner's getting value out of the investment that they're making. So, you know, it's really not a question of what standard requires, what each standard requires, but I think it's a value decision that the owner has to make based on their building performance. And if they want a high-performance building, that's why they're looking at a rating system. They should do things like commissioning and energy modeling, and that's where the big cost difference is anyway. The registration fees aren't that. I think Green Globe's a little bit higher, but they're similar.
Right. So I would, do you want all of us to answer this? Or
If you guys would feel,
Okay,
yeah, you
sure.
have some,
Yeah.
definitely.
So I echo what Richard was saying. I think, you know, another advantage is this notion of third-party review, and both systems do that and in different ways. And I think that's really valuable for building owners to have that third-party review of the design in progress, of the building when it's under construction, and of the building after construction. I think another value that rating systems bring in general are a really clear set of goals. If someone says, you know, I want you to jump, you need to be able to say how high, and that's what these systems are meant to do, so that's a big advantage for owners. I think the certification fees can be a challenge. They are similar in both systems, and we can get into that more if we want to, but they can be a challenge. It's mostly done on a per square foot basis, which means, you know, a smaller building will have a lower certification fee. I think there's ways we could probably make that even better. There are some ideas, there's some programs like Living Building Challenge that has a pedal system. So if a small business owner just wanted to focus on one thing, like let's just get one thing right, like energy or water, I think that's a great system to look at whenever you want to do one thing really, really well. So it's good that that system exists. And then I think the Earth Advantage system does a good job with small business owners as well.
Actually, building off of that, all of these rating systems have water conservation, energy efficiency, recycling or waste management. Is one rating system more likely to result in, let's just pick energy efficiency, in a more energy efficient building than the other rating system, or do they both approach it from a different avenue? And we can start on the
Sure.
engineering side.
I guess I'm an energy analyst, so I probably am more focused on the energy, or that's what first comes to my mind. I think, I guess looking at the two different rating systems, LEED has a prerequisite for most buildings. Some of the smaller buildings don't fit in that prerequisite, where they actually need to have a certain energy savings, whereas Green Globes does not. They don't have to have a set energy savings. Both LEED and Green Globes, they are comparing the same baseline, which is ASHRAE 90.1 when the energy analysis is done. And so they're starting out with that baseline, and so the energy savings that would be targeted would be similar. So I think on those two aspects, or on that aspect, Green Globes and LEED are very similar. Also, I think one of the key things that is different between Green Globes and LEED is LEED has commissioning as a prerequisite, whereas Green Globes doesn't. I think that's a critical pathway for successful energy efficiency, regardless on how efficient or how efficiently the building was designed. If it's not working properly, then there could be some issues, some large issues with the energy savings. So I think that's a critical thing that LEED prescriptively says you must do this. We don't care, you must. And in Green Globes there is no prerequisites, so it's possible to actually actually design a very efficient building, but maybe the owner doesn't actually want to pay for the commissioning, or isn't educated on how critical commissioning is, then that could be negated. So there's kind of an open door that I see a potential with Green Globes. On the other hand, Green Globes also puts more emphasis on the energy. If you look at Green Globes, there's actually more points or credit associated with the energy. So there's somewhat of a balance there, but at the same time with commissioning, there's a concern that might be, I guess, lost since it's not a prerequisite.
Actually,
And that's just speaking to the energy side.
yeah, actually I was
Sorry.
going to say, since you touched on the commissioning, that
Okay.
actually is a good segue. I have a question here that's written from a contractor. The commissioning process at the end of construction has added a lot of time and hoops for the contractor to jump through. Have you seen additional benefit to the building owners and facility managers? And secondly, how have the two rating systems impacted the commissioning process? And I might ask Richard to start with that one.
Thanks. I think commissioning is, a contractor might see it as a hoop to jump through or a hurdle, but they also might see it as a value, so that when they turn that building over to the owner, that building works and they're not getting callbacks. The owner's not frustrated because systems don't work. I mean, commissioning is a vital quality control process. And buildings are so complicated, there's electrical subs, mechanical subs, controls contractors, fire life safety contractors, all working together and getting all that stuff integrated. It really takes somebody whose main focus is to make sure that kind of integration happens. And so we look at commissioning really as a quality control process that's a value to the contractor and the subcontractors to make them look really good to the owner. So it shouldn't be considered a hurdle, it should be considered a real value added, so they don't get called back.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm just chomping at the bit here.
Yeah.
I think what Shem said, and the second is what Richard said about commissioning not being a requirement in Green Globes, that's true. But there's also a perspective I think you have to keep in mind. Owners might decide that they get better sustainability results putting their money elsewhere, and that's their choice. I'm not sure I would refer to commissioning as hoops to jump through, because I think there's a value, it's best practice in the industry, and it's something that ought to be done. It's a question of can it or should it be done given the building constraints and budget. But it's also I think there needs to be an understanding, at least perspective. A lot of vendors will require you to keep your hands off their systems. Refrigeration is a really good example. Some HVAC designers also, they do their own commissioning. So as a matter of course, that's part of the purchase. That's not always the case. So commissioning is certainly a value, but the question of relative value compared to other costs that you might invest to make your project more sustainable, that we leave as a rating system, we leave that choice up to the owners. So it's not a question of we don't think it's good value. We think the owner has to make that choice. I think that would be the answer to that question. But just not to overstate this, the question that our moderator asks is, do you get a better system? I would like to make one point, and it's really a little bit divergent from whether it's a LEED or a Green Globes project. I think that's not really the substantive issue. What we've seen time and time again is building, there's a myth or a naivete that when you design a building to be sustainable within water, energy, materials, the site development itself, ecologically responsible, for example, that's sufficient. But in order to achieve enduring sustainability, buildings have to be managed. And I think this is the single flaw, to put a plaque on the wall at the end of design construction, for a new building at least, or a major renovation. If that energy, the water use, and the waste streams are not managed, you're not going to see a sustainable building. And that's a challenge for the whole industry, not just for LEED or Green Globes.
I'm actually glad you raised that point. I live in a condo complex right now that I know is not living up to its badge in the way that they conserve water.
I guess speaking, Tom, to that point, could you talk a little bit about what Green Globes is doing on the O&M side?
You really don't want to get me started.
I guess because from my perspective, we have a LEED E-Bomb program, but
Yeah.
it seems like Green Globes ends at construction at this point.
I think that we also have the equivalent or something parallel and an analog to the LEED E-Bomb. We call it continual improvement for existing buildings, which addresses some of the questions about energy, water, resource management. But more importantly, and this is more of an issue for me personally, we just wrote specifications and recommendations to the National ANSI Committee, who's renovating the Green Building Standard under the auspices of our organization, our nonprofit, the Green Building Initiative. They're undergoing right now a renovation to promulgate a new standard, which will be out in 2015. The emphasis, my emphasis, and I'm really adamant about this, is that for a new construction project, it's insufficient to just have a design. You have to also put in some kind of teeth or some kind of bridge criteria for enduring sustainability beyond the design to go into the building operation and day-to-day resource management. And resource includes water, energy, carbon, waste, and probably procurement. So there's 5 streams right there. If we get our way, or if our recommendations are accommodated, we will see a sustainability rating system that takes into account enduring factors for operation, and I think that's where we're headed as an organization.
Actually, my next question was going to go away from operations and management, so I'm going to do that. During design, and I'm kind of gearing this towards Jessica, during design, have the checklists and processes laid out in either rating system helped or hurt the creative process? And the reason I think I'm asking this is one of the precepts I've come to this whole discussion with was that beautiful buildings tend to last and be around longer than ugly buildings. So does this process allow beautiful buildings? Does it impair them? Does it encourage them? And how has it impacted your clients and your consultants' input on that process?
Right, so the biggest fear I have is that people take a checklist and think and use that as design, right? That's not what it's about. You can't use a checklist as a surrogate for design and high performance. We can use these systems as tools to manage and measure our success, and that's what they're really good at, but they're definitely not a substitution for design. What I've seen them do very effectively is allow a group of people to coalesce around some ideas, to get excited about the fact that we're going to save 1 million gallons of water a year on this project. And the reason we did it was because, well, we saw there was this 40% goal that was set for us by this LEED rating system, and we thought we could do even better than that. So we worked a little bit harder. We thought about water catchment. We got a storage tank on site. We're capturing stormwater now. And suddenly we're at 50% or 60% improved water usage reduction. And that would be for CLSB, for example, which we just finished, that's over 1 million gallons of water a year. So the system starts as a box and a check and a number, but it turns into something real that's quantifiable. So I think that's enhanced the design process to allow people to coalesce, as I was saying, around those ideas. We work really hard at SARA to use an integrative process approach, and that is something that LEED V4 is now supporting. There's a credit now that supports the notion that you start early with integrating your sustainability ideas through shoebox energy modeling and water modeling, and you bring the team together sooner so that they can be part of the design discussion and so that the design can inform the direction that sustainability goes. I think we already all do that naturally, and so it's nice that there's a rating system that now acknowledges that that happens, and we get a little bit of credit for that. So I guess long-winded in general, the rating systems, as long as they're not used as a crutch, are really effective at bringing a team together to deliver a high-performance building.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the question that was asked was, does it hamper your creativity? And as an engineer, I wasn't thinking about the aesthetics of the building, which I do think about. But what I was thinking about is the creativity of the systems and integrating everything together. And I think that's a good illustration of wherever each discipline comes from is their focus. And I think what the checklist actually helps to, and having an overall goal, is to make sure that if there's a group of people coming up with sustainability, that it's holistic. And so what can tend to happen if there's not a checklist or a holistic list of things that need to be considered is that it can become completely focused on energy or maybe daylighting or water. But what the checklist allows us to do is to actually go through and make sure that the building is considered as a whole and it keeps us on track. And then once we've gone through that, we're able to go to an eco-charrette or a meeting, an integrated design meeting with that in the background and be able to focus on the creative aspects of it. So I haven't really felt like the checklist has hampered or been used as a crutch.
We say that if you get a good design team together and you work on building a really good building, then the points will take care of themselves.
Yeah.
So when we do charrettes and try and get people that, we talk about the categories, energy, water, materials, but we don't go through a LEED scorecard until the very end if we have to, because
We call that death by LEED.
yeah, because then pretty
We
soon
don't
you're
put people
like,
through that.
yeah, and everybody's like, okay, what's SS credit 6.1? They don't want to hear that. So we work on creativity, building performance, and then go through the checklist and see where your strengths and where your weaknesses are, and if there's a few things you need to tweak. But especially on design teams where they have to do LEED like a mandate, like some government projects. They've never done a LEED project, it's a mandate. What they want to do first thing is sit down and go through that LEED scorecard. And we really have to back people off to not get chained to that. Use the creative process and then fill out the scorecard.
I'm going to ask and see if we have any questions from, unless you wanted to comment as well.
Okay.
I know you always want to comment, Tom, so it's not my intention to cut you off.
No, not at all. I think the theme here about integrated design or integrated project delivery is really important. And if you're chasing points just to get a score, you're probably not the best sustainability advocate or owner. You just want your certification. And there's plenty of that going around, I think, in all rating systems. Energy Star, Earth Advantage, LEED, Green Globes. There's enough of that to be seen across the board. But I like Jessica's point about setting goals. I think the scorecards give you an idea of, it gives you something to aim for, or it gives you criteria to be able to evaluate. Can we include construction waste management? Can we do better design with our architectural enclosure? These are the questions that are asked, or should be asked, or could be asked at the beginning of projects. And everybody on the design team has an opportunity to weigh in and participate and contribute. So the idea is, checklist gives you some guidelines. It's like putting bumpers on a bowling alley. Make sure the ball gets to the bowling ball gets to the pins. It gives you a set of constraints. And any design engineer will tell you that they're using their CAD system on the left, and they're looking at their code requirements on the right, whether it's plumbing or energy or electrical. Code gives them a set of constraints or standards to design to. So people ask the question, what's going to make my project more sustainable? They can go to the rating system checklist, they can look up the definitions and the intent or the technical requirements, and they can say, oh, I see, this is how we do site design, or this is how we can improve the energy efficiency of our building. So the checklists are just guidelines. They're not an end in themselves.
I like that bumpers analogy because you're never going to get a strike if all you do is use the bumpers.
You still might not.
I like that. Did I steal that? Sorry. So now I'm going to ask if we have any questions from the audience.
No, next to the farthest location away from the microphone, didn't I? So I work for a general contractor. We've only done LEED projects. So I'm asking this as a educational question. Because we've talked to owners about green globes as an option, but it hasn't come through in the designs and projects that we've bid on yet. We've had several projects recently that want to do sustainable buildings. They'll design to some extent, then they do what's called LEED tracking. And we still have to go through all the steps of tracking all these things as if it were a LEED, but they're not going to go, they don't want to do the certification. So I was going to ask, I mean, in those moments, especially when we're on CMGC projects and we have some influence, to talk to the owner about what they're doing. I mean, is Green Globes a good alternative to have them look at it where maybe they don't have to do all the like commissioning and some stringent requirements that for some reason LEED's making them back off for the certification process?
Well, I guess that question goes to me. I don't mind answering it. I'll grab as much of the floor as I can take. Sorry, guys. Our point of view is sustainability is a spectrum. It's not an all or none. Even if you were to achieve LEED, silver, gold, platinum, or 1, 2, 3, or 4 green globes, it's a matter of degree. So you can put your emphasis in materials, you can put your emphasis in energy, you can put your emphasis in site development, or you can apportion your emphasis however you want. So I think that you have that flexibility with green globes. I think that's part of the opportunities, flexibility. I think that's probably the main answer to your question, but there might be another piece that I'm missing. I didn't quite answer everything you asked.
Well, I guess from our point of view, is Green Globes at that step when we see that an owner's trying to achieve certain things, but somehow they're scared off by the LEED certification process, is Green Globes a good alternative that we could steer them towards, since they're doing the work to an extent?
All right, let me take a different tack. What you probably aren't aware of, because this is more of an informational session, I think, for all of us. LEED and Green Globes are derived from the same parent, the BREEAM, B-R-E-E-A-M system from the United Kingdom. And the 7 areas of sustainability: site development, water, energy, materials, integrated project management, indoor environmental quality emissions. Those 7 areas, I think I got them all. You will find, if you compare the requirements of LEED to the criteria requirements of Green Globes, there's a lot of overlap, in some cases almost verbatim requirements. So the systems are similar in that sense. There's a parallelism, there's a correspondence. Now, if you're running a project and you go, gee, we're too late for LEED, we missed this prerequisite, is there an alternative? You might well find that Green Globes will give you an alternative, not because your building's less sustainable, but because prerequisites tend to be, there are windows for prerequisite achievement. After a certain period of SD or DD, CD design, you might have missed the opportunity. That doesn't mean your project isn't sustainable, it just means you missed a prerequisite. So you could come to us and come to one of our Green Globes assessors and have him or her take a look at your project design and see whether you've met qualifications according to those 7 areas of sustainability. You still have that option. It's not a guarantee that you'll be approved, because the submission requirements, and I'll try to be just brief this last sentence, the submission requirements for LEED in terms of documentation are not that substantively, divergently different than Green Globes and vice versa. You still have to provide an environmental management plan, for example. You still have to do the energy analysis if you pursue those credits using ASHRAE 90.1 Appendix G protocol. The requirements, the documentation, the standards are very similar.
Richard, I wanted to ask if you feel that window with the prerequisites is an accurate depiction of that?
Well, I mean, I think that, I mean, prerequisites are that. There are prerequisites, and some buildings don't qualify. We have a casino project right now, Tom and I can talk to you about, because it can't be non-smoking, so it can't be a LEED building. So they might go to Green Globes as an alternative approach because they want some recognition of their sustainability behavior. I think that the reason LEED has prerequisites is they say that there's a minimum amount of performance that you have to do. I mean, there's a building just has to perform to a certain level, certain, 20% above ASHRAE, 20% water safety, there's things you have to do in a minimum. So, yeah, those prerequisites are there. They make LEED a little bit more challenging, but they're there for a reason.
Okay.
I would also, just to address your question, if you were my client and you were asking about which certification system to use, what I always try to do is align the values and the goals of the client with the rating system. And so, for example, if you're really interested in healthy indoor environments and healthy materials, because in your workplace, you know that a well-daylit space with healthy materials and views and good acoustics is going to increase your productivity, which studies are showing now more and more, and we're getting all kinds of clients that are very, very interested in indoor environmental quality because we spend 90% of our time indoors in the United States. I would align you with LEED V4 in particular, because that's really the strength there. And there are, Tom, you were saying there's lots of similarities, but there's lots of differences between Green Globes and LEED, particularly around the realm of healthy materials and indoor environments. Green Globes is still using the outdated VOC standard from 2004, and they don't have a requirement for no added urea formaldehyde in composite wood and acrofiber products. So those are areas of concern for us when we're trying to align rating systems with client values.
Are there any other? Yep. Got a question from Skip.
Linda asked a question. Everybody knows that certification LEEDs or Green Globes cost money, and projects are more expensive. I don't know how much, a little bit. But other than bragging rights, is there some benefit that the owner can get, like tax credits or something that would come out of getting a sustainable building?
Well, I think the Oregon Energy Trust, I know they give incentives for energy efficiency. I think they recognize LEED. Are they recognizing Green Globes yet?
No.
No, okay. Just asking a question. I don't know.
Although we've been down that road with
Yeah,
the trust, I have another answer.
Yeah. So,
But I'll wait my turn.
Yeah. So there are some benefits. We used to have the Betsy Energy Tax Credit for LEED. I think that pretty much went away. But the Energy Trust does recognize sustainable building, and they recognize the LEED standard as that. So there is financial incentives that can be pretty substantial on projects when they're following the LEED protocol, because it seems to be more than the little bits that you would get from putting in individual energy efficient equipment.
And I would add that beyond that, you're getting a building that has lower operating costs because of lower energy usage, For example, if you look at, so there's been all kinds of studies about, do LEED buildings use less energy? Are they thus less expensive to operate in? There was the NBI study that kind of kicked it all off, and that was flawed. And so then there was the Gifford rebuke that dug into that flawed study. And then since then, there's been other studies about that. But the problem is that when you look at the studies about energy usage in LEED buildings, they don't just look at the projects that were targeting reduced energy usage. You can get a LEED certified building and only hit the prerequisite, which is a 10% energy cost savings improvement over ASHRAE. So there is a study that did do that. The GSA published a study in 2011, and there are holdings of many, 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 many buildings in this country. And so they looked at their high performance building stock, and they said, is this LEED program stuff worth it for us? Is it saving us any money? Or are we just getting plaques? And they found that for their LEED gold buildings, they had a 27% reduction in energy usage, which amounts to a 35% in energy cost savings. And so you can imagine how much the GSA is spending on energy every year on all these buildings. 35% is a huge amount of money. They also saw that they had, I believe, 27% in operating expense reduction, or 34% operating cost reductions in these buildings as well, and then a 10%, over 10% increase in satisfaction from the people that work in those buildings. So user satisfaction, I would say, is another benefit from doing these certification systems, especially with LEED in the GSA's case.
Okay, time for rebuttal. I don't necessarily dispute your numbers, Jessica. I have to say, though, two things, and I'll actually work my way backwards. The first thing is that the GSA has recognized both LEED and Green Globes as applicable certification protocols for their buildings. We even have a system, what we call the Guiding Principles Compliance, which is similar to our Green Globes, that the federal government uses. We've done over 200 VA facilities, for example, using these tools or these certification protocols.
Have you read the news from about 3 weeks ago, though?
About the M&B requirement?
No, yes, the DOE's final ruling on that.
I'm not necessarily sure I know what you're referring to specifically, but I do want to address the question about incentives. Over 2/3 of the United States have in their legislation that either LEED or Green Globes can be used for certification, and some of that's built into their legal requirements for new public buildings. It's certainly true in the state of Washington, but there are other states around the rest of the country that will use either certification system as valid for purposes of tax incentives. Now, when it comes to Energy Trust in Oregon, the legislation doesn't say you can give incentives for Green Globe achievement or Green Globe certification. But what Trust does say that if you put in energy efficient systems, you can get incentives. And after more in the recent past, the managers of the new construction program told me, and this is when I worked at Green Building Services, Mr. Richards' group, that you're better off, and this might not still be the case since things change in 2 or 3 years, but that you're better off in pursuing your incentives based on a per square footage or a total energy savings than you are using a LEED certification as a basis for your incentive. So the point being, if you get energy efficient design built into your building, your project, you're eligible for incentives throughout the country, and it's not unique to LEED. As far as satisfaction, energy reduction, energy efficiency, cost reduction, there are a number of studies that are being evaluated now. I'm not disputing what you said, Jessica. It's just that I think that the Kathy Martin study, the MDI study that came out, I think it was 2007, that showed the LEED results all over the map. I think the flaw there was the expectation that energy analysis was a predictive tool. It's not. And we can get into more of that detail. That's more of my background. I can tell you why energy analysis has some gaps or some flaws. But what it comes down to is, I'll repeat what I said earlier, an efficient design is one thing, an operating building that shows results is something else. And we have to really get beyond the notion or the expectation or the myth that a plaque on the wall that demonstrates an efficient design is sufficient for enduring sustainability. I think we're headed in that direction as an industry.
Okay. That was a good round, good volley. Okay. I have to ask who put the umbrellas with the pointy sticks, pointy ends up there, but just not point those out, I guess. We're gonna change to, this is a little more generic question, I hope. Master spec is commonly used on projects, and I'm kind of curious how specifications in general are being worked into both rating systems or other rating systems, if you care to comment on that as well. And who wants to go first?
I'll go first because I'm the guy who gets stuck doing all the spec reviews at work. So we do a lot of specification reviews. We see specifications from all kinds of projects. The place where we focus on for LEED projects is really the submittal requirements. Because you can spec anything, all kinds of materials go into buildings, but it's really, for LEED certification, the submittal requirements are pretty specific, what you need to show for documentation. And so we want to make sure that all those get into the LEED, into the specifications. You put all those submittal requirements in there, then all the contractor has to do is follow the spec and go to LEED building. And that's our goal, is to make it that for the contractor, it's part of his contract, is just the flow of the work they have to do. We don't want LEED to be some extra hurdle or extra things we have to do. It's just part of the contract. It's part of the regular submittal review process. And you just collect all that documentation as you go. And you find that makes the process a lot easier on everybody's part.
Is that true, Jessica? Or either way?
Yeah. And then there's
Yes, I agree.
Yes, you agree.
and then getting the Division 1 specifications right in terms of, in some, depends on the project, sometimes we'll have, when a contractor has to make their application for payment, that there's LEED reports that they have to include with that, so that we make sure that we're staying on top of the LEED data. And then the contractor has real incentive to make sure they're staying on top of it too. So anytime you can put things in Division 1, that brings the LEED processes and meeting requirements and some other requirements into their regular, owner meeting schedules and applications for payment, makes the project go a lot smoother.
And I guess speaking for Green Globe, since that's somewhat new, we have 4 projects that we're working on. LEED's been around for a while, so we have LEED incorporated into all our master specs, but right now, with these 4 projects we're working on, we're vetting out the specs, and then once those specs are done, then we're going to take what we've learned from that and then incorporate that into our master specifications. So it's a process for that to happen. So right now, we have LEED in there, but Green Globes is coming.
Okay, so just in our defense, I think what's interesting is that I've talked to some of the specification template writers, like Consensus Doc, for example. They're curious and interested to know what it would take to put Green Globe specifications for water, energy, materials into a master template. And we actually are working with one of the major architecture firms here in town to put those kinds of specs into a standard design criteria. But we don't have, as far as to my knowledge, and I'm pretty sure that this is not the case, that there is no Green Globes template out there yet. There might well be in the near future. I think the spec template makers have a stake in, as the industry grows and Green Globes makes headway into different markets, that they would also have a market for their templates, but we're not there yet.
Okay, so I'm seeing it's coming up on 8 o'clock. I guess this isn't actually on the question list that went out, but are there any questions that you wish had been asked or that you would like to ask any of the other panelists? And I can give you time to think about that if you need time to think about that, and I can ask Charisse if we have any questions from the internet.
I do have one from an architect in California.
Hold on a second, Charisse, let the microphone get to
I
you.
hate microphones.
I know you do.
The question is, and it's actually asking to expand on a question that was asked earlier when you were talking about commissioning.
My tweet was commissioning has added a lot of time and hoops to the process. Have you seen real benefit to the owner? And this architect is asked to follow up on that more, please. Sometimes you guys were talking faster than I can tweet. And so if you'd like more information on the benefits that you see for the owner by performing commissioning.
I can add a little bit to that. I love reading commissioning logs. That sounds really weird, but it's fascinating. You'll
Like
see,
watching paint dry?
it's like, no, it's way more interesting because you'll see things like the filters are installed backwards. The fans in the gymnasium are set to manual, so they will not communicate with your building management system and thus will never be turned on. You'll see things like second floor hallway has no ventilation. And you realize if you hadn't done commissioning, when are those issues found out, right? The poor facilities people who have to try to manage that building for the first few months or years while they're working out all these kinks. So if you ever get a chance to read the commissioning logs on your project, I really encourage you to do it because they're fascinating.
Well, some of the pictures that commissioning agents come back with too are pretty fascinating. Diffusers that somebody cut a piece out so sprinkler pipe can run through it. All kinds of interesting photographs.
Or
I like
a control valve that was installed backwards, so
Right.
it's closed when it should be open.
Yeah.
Sounds like a great premise for a website. Commissioning fails, or all those
A reality
photos.
TV show.
Yeah. Or a great
Commissioning with the stars.
commissioning with the stars. Well, Jessica's definitely proved her dedication to this panel because she just admitted a very secret love. Loves reading commissioning reports. So is that enough time for you guys to come up with questions that you might have?
Well, I guess, I don't know if it's really a question. Maybe we can make a question out of it.
Okay.
I mean, one thing we haven't really got to yet, and it really has to get to where LEED, the next version of LEED version 4, which, some people are kind of scared of LEED version 4, and I think we've sort of seen more interest from Green Globes, because I think there's a little less interest in LEED right now, and we're seeing more openness in the marketplace. But, as LEED version 4 moves forward, they're really taking this whole life cycle approach to a building, getting away from single attribute, recycled content, regional materials, and looking at, life cycle of materials. And so they're asking manufacturers to provide product declaration forms or health declaration forms, encouraging the manufacturers to be more transparent about how they procure their materials, where they come from, what chemicals are in them, what are the health concerns about these materials. And that's something that I think manufacturer transparency is something that's really been missing in the marketplace. And LEED's about market transformation. And so when some manufacturers start to be open about the health impacts of their materials, LEED's not going to punish them, saying like, oh, you have bad chemicals, so you can't use it. They're just going to say, we just want to know, we just want you to be transparent about it. And as more and more manufacturers start to be transparent, more manufacturers will go, just like we saw with VOC paint and some other materials years ago. A few manufacturers made VOC paint, then they all made VOC paint. So I think that one of the places where Green Globes and LEED are going to diverge is this idea of manufacturer transparency that we're going to see in the future.
Well,
What do you think, Tom? I think that's a question.
Exactly. Actually, that was my question. What do you think, Tom?
thank you for that question, Richard. You should probably be aware, you might already know, that both the integrated project design and life cycle analysis requirements have been in Green Globes since its inception. We just celebrated our 10th year. We were we started in 2004. I think the issue here, especially with the environmental product declarations, DPDs, we offer alternative ways of achieving that kind of documentation. We're certainly for multiple attribute disclosure. That's never been not the case. Where we diverge is maybe how those processes work to converge on the kind of documentation required for credits in our respective systems. But it's not that we're ignoring it, it's not that we're bypassing it. We've always been a champion of life cycle analysis. The other piece of that is whether it's a risk-based or the risk-based analysis versus an alternate way of looking at all or nothing of chemicals. I think there needs to be some science built into which products or which components are inimical to a good environment, a healthy environment, and it's not an all or none thing. I mean, you could take the extreme case and too much water would drown you, so does that make water a bad product? And I don't mean to be facetious. What I'm trying to make a point is that you have to weigh how these products are developed, how they're manufactured, produced, transported, used, and then recycled. You have to look at the whole process, the whole case. That's where the life cycle analysis comes in. So I'm not sure that neither the USGBC nor the Green Building Initiative and Green Globes are all that divergent. I think we're headed down the same path. The industry is certainly being dragged along. Maybe it hasn't been all that healthy courtship, but we need disclosure that that's the case, I think, regardless of which rating system you use.
Any other comments on that issue?
Well, I just want to clarify that it's really confusing that we now have HPDs and EPDs, and just so people can keep them straight, the EPD, which is the Environmental Product Declaration, that's about the life cycle analysis, as Tom was saying, the extraction, manufacture, use, all the environmental impacts. But where I think the two systems really diverge is looking at the health impacts. And so that's when you talk about HPDs, the Healthy Product Declaration, that's what that's about. And so that's your nutrition label. What is your granite countertop made of? How is it manufactured? What's the chemical that was placed on it when it was manufactured? The Health Product Declaration support for LEED v4 is very strong, and I don't see that kind of support yet in Green Globes. So that's a big difference in my mind.
Okay. Wow. Say that again. Are we out of time? Oh, I don't actually know how long we're supposed to go until. Are we supposed to go until 8:30 or?
Are there any other questions?
Okay, here we go.
You discussed the HPD emphasis and the importance of it, but yet the USGBC just delayed the LEED v4 implementation for 2 years. And the LEED 4 had a lot of emphasis toward that factor. How do you balance those two things? If it's important, why does it take them 2 years to implement LEED v4?
I was surprised to hear that, and disappointed too, right? I'm pretty excited about the new changes, but what I've heard from whatever little inside knowledge I have is that it had to do with so when they launched LEED v4, one of the other big changes is additional international application. So beefing up including standards that will allow you to apply them in international settings. And so apparently they've had trouble because of that change. And so that's what the delay was about. It could also be their sense that the marketplace is not ready. They looked to see, well, okay, the LEED v4 registration is now open. How many projects have we seen register under v4? Probably not as many as they had anticipated by this time. So also maybe another reason to delay.
Yeah, I think there's just been hesitation on the marketplace. We've seen it in our office. We do a lot of LEED projects. We probably have 70, 85 LEED projects going on at any one time. And everybody's reluctant to go to the new system. It's like as long as they can stick with what they know, they're happier. So it's really hard to push people, and I think that's it. They haven't seen the market grab hold. There's a fear or trepidation about what all this means. I think especially around the materials credits, because a lot of manufacturers don't have EPD forms out yet. So I think that there's sort of giving manufacturers a chance to get the documentation, get the EPD forms. You can't just make one overnight. It's quite a process. You have to go through ISO standards. You have to make product category rules and all this process to go through. So I think they're giving the marketplace a little bit of time to catch up, and I think that's part of it. I don't sit in the boardroom, so I don't know what the real conversations are about, but those are my guesses.
I have a germane question. I work for an organization that has done their EPDs and HPDs, and we have over 50% of them filed. But as I'm visiting with various architect offices and asking them how they are collecting and assessing and using the information, I'm getting a lot of deer in the headlights responses. Can you capture or characterize for me how you will apply the HPDs? How are you going to use HPDs to compare one product to the other?
That's the ultimate idea, right? So it's a two-step process is what LEED V4 is asking you to do. One, just collect HPDs for 20 of your products that show
Any 20?
well, it's probably
From
division,
manufacturers.
it has to be from 5 different manufacturers, and it probably has to be from divisions 2 through 10. Collect 20 of those. That's just step one. And that's pushing the market. That's not on the design side, right? But you'll select products potentially based on the availability of that HPD. Then step 2 is let's optimize. So now you look at them side by side and you say, is there something different or better about this product than this product? And now I'm going to choose one or the other.
Yeah, and that's where your value proposition comes in. This one's more energy efficient, but this one has more water pollution associated with it. You know, you'll get those kind of informations.
On
So
the
that-
EPD side,
EPD
you do
side,
that
yeah.
analysis, right?
And then that sort of all the things that designers have to look at, product performance, durability, it's another piece of information. It may not be the deciding piece of information, but it's one more piece of information, and it's good information, it's transparency.
I mean, if we could get a non-vinyl flooring product to put in our housing, multifamily housing projects right now, if I could look at an HPD and say, oh, does not contain phthalates, does contain phthalates,
Yeah.
you know, which one am I going to choose? I have a toddler. They're the most impacted age group of all in terms of phthalates and walk-in flooring, so it would be decisions like that that we'd be able to make.
I have a product for you. So. Marmoleum always been good, never been bad. We have HPDs on all
We
our
love that. All of our clients are asking for flooring that looks like wood. So if you can get your marmoleum to look like
So,
wood.
I do have something for you.
Okay.
Marmoleum is
That's
the best
wonderful.
one.
Actually, I have a question that's kind of along the lines of what you were discussing earlier. What ratings for building construction do they issue overseas? And are there minimum standards exceeded or by LEED, or do they exceed LEED? Or is this even an issue we should be concerned with?
Well, the major growth in the LEED rating system now has been international. There's more buildings outside the United States seeking LEED certification than inside the United States. We worked several years ago with the USGBC to help write the alternative compliance path for international projects to look at things like regional materials and take into account shipping versus shipping by train versus by ship. And so I think that the USGBC has worked really hard to try and make sure that those standards are equivalent. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done. You know, the USGBC says you can't build on USDA farmland. Well, how do you do that in China? So there was a lot of things that was, LEED was very North American, American-centric. But I think with version 4, and even in version 3, they had the alternative compliance path for international projects. And I think that just got better.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience?
All right, last question.
Well, on that topic, we happen to do projects overseas. In Singapore, there's Greenmark. In Dubai, there is Estidama. And they're similar. They've got their own rating systems. I just wonder if, excuse me, this all wreaks havoc on spec writers' sleep habits, trying to get their masters agreeable to all these different systems. So with the International Energy Code, do you see somewhere in the future an international sustainable design guide that perhaps there are common requirements that then Green Globes and LEED have their amendments, like we have state building code amendments?
Let me address that very quickly. We're confined, Green Globes is confined to the United States, so I have no comment.
A short answer.
And on that note,
I was going to, international, I think we've done a few projects in China and Malaysia, and a lot of, China has 3-star, and Australia, they have theirs. We've been seeing, for projects that want to attract international, especially in China, they want to attract international tenants to an office building, they're using LEED certification because they see that as an international brand of quality, that LEED's kind of recognized as the same standard in lots of different countries, South America. So when I think project teams or project developers are looking for an international brand, where they want to attract international attention, that's what they're doing. In Doha, where we're getting ready for the World Cup, they're doing LEED certification and QSAS. They're doing both for a lot of the World Cup stadiums and things. So I think these country-based systems are important because there's regional thing. Building a building in Dubai is a lot different than building a building here in Oregon, and they're addressing different environmental challenges. But I think they use LEED when they want to appeal to an international market.
well, I'd just like to thank Shem, Jessica, Richard, and Tom for letting me ask them pre-written questions that we all don't know the answers to.
What?
No, this was a great dynamic, and I think everybody is going to come away from this with a lot more knowledge about green globes and what's the other one? Oh, LEED. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.